I've read over 40 books on money and personal finance. And the ideas from these books have taken me from zero to almost financially independent. So these are my top 20 finance books that I recommend to everyone. We're starting off with Set for Life. This is actually the first book that I generally recommend to people, which is why I have two, because I loan them out a lot. In Set for Life, Scott Trench really goes over pretty much everything you need to know about financial independence and early retirement, frugal living, house hacking. I didn't read this till a couple years ago, but it's pretty much exactly all the steps that I have done, minus a few things here and there. One of my favorite ideas from this book is that true wealth is about building out a financial runway, creating enough rapidly accessible wealth that you can survive without work for a year, then 5 years, then for a lifetime. And that's really the whole idea of the FIRE movement. It's spending less, earning more, and then investing the difference correctly. And this book, which is actually one of my top recommended books, is The 4-Hour Workweek. Despite a lot of the info being a little bit out of date, this one really transformed my life. Even if you don't read this, I definitely recommend you try dreamlining. Pretty much you put in what you want to have, what you want to do, and what you want to be into a spreadsheet, and you find out how much that would actually cost you per month. And then now that you have that number, you figure out how to earn that much extra money or that much money in total within the next 6 months. So it's not something you can put off. If you want to try this out, I'll leave a link to this sheet down below. For me, at least, most of the stuff was actually way more affordable than you think it is. You just put off all these things in your life because you think they're way out of reach, they're super expensive. They're not actually. You can do a lot of stuff if you just think differently than most people. You ask, how can I afford it, instead of saying, I can't afford it. And also, I love the quote in this book, less is not laziness. As a bit of a minimalist myself, I definitely agree with that. The compound effect. There are two quotes from this book that really sum the whole thing up for me. You will never change your life until you change something that you do daily. The secret of your success is found in your daily routines, which is something that I love. You hear me talk about trying to do one thing every day to get me closer to my goals, and it has completely transformed my business over the past couple of years. It's not the big things that add up in the end. It's the hundreds, thousands, or millions of little things that separate the ordinary from the extraordinary. Just the idea of compound interest was life-changing for me. A great example is if you invest $1 when you're 20, that dollar will be worth $88 if you retire at 65, calculating in 10% interest compounded over 45 years. But if you wait until you're 30, just 10 years later, that $1 will only be $33, from 88 down to 33. And that's because of that crazy hockey stick curve of compound interest. It's the same thing when you're investing money. Invest as early as humanly possible, and with your habits, do little things over a long period of time. If you guys want to check out that calculator, I'll leave it down below. The Cashflow Quadrant. This is from the Rich Dad Poor Dad series, but luckily it is super easy to explain. Pretty much there are 4 different quadrants that we all kind of live in. On one side, there is the employee and self-employed. On the other side, there is business owner and investor. As an employee, you have a job, pretty obvious. You're working to generally make somebody else rich. On the S side, you still have a job, you just own that job, which is generally even more stressful, even though I think it's slightly better. But if you really want to build wealth, you have to switch over to the B and I sectors. B would be you own the system and people work for you. So you're leveraging other people's times, you're also creating jobs, and in return, you're making more money than you could just working by yourself. And then the I, the investor, is kind of the pinnacle where your money makes more money. This is investing, whether it's stocks, real estate, you earn money, you invest that, and then it pays you pretty much for the rest of your life. Next up, we have the simple path to wealth. If real estate is not your thing and you want to invest in the stock market, this is the book I would definitely recommend you read. And while there's a lot more detail, I'm going to save you about 6 hours here. It breaks down into 3 steps. Spend less than you make, avoid debt like the absolute plague, and then invest everything that you can into index funds, whether that's the S&P 500 or BTSAX. And he also shoots for like a 50% savings rate, which is something that I generally adhere to. When you look at the stock market as a whole, it has grown by 11.9% per year on average when dividends are reinvested. And that's since like the 1950s. So that means if you invested $1,000 in 1980, by 2020, it would be $1 million. So don't try to outsmart the market, just invest in index funds that are extremely low cost and just kind of like let time do all the work. Now let's say that you don't like stocks and maybe you're more into real estate. This is the book I would recommend, Investing in Real Estate with No and Low Money Down by Brandon Turner, Bigger Pockets. If you know, you know. This is one of the books that I read when I was starting to get my first rental. There's a ton of step-by-step actions in here, a ton of different ideas and plans that I had no idea existed, different ways to buy rentals when you don't have a lot of money. or even using other people's money to do it. This is definitely focused on leverage, using other people's money to make you money, which can be risky when done wrong. So read a lot of books before you like put your money into it. But for me, it's made me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So worth the $15 or however much this thing costs. Next up here, we have your money or your life. Coffee is life. Anyways, one of my favorite points from this book is that money is energy. Like we spend our energy, our lives, and we trade that for money. So that means when you buy something, you're not trading paper or coins for like an actual thing. You're trading your life. The most valuable thing that you have, you're trading it for random stuff. Really makes you not want to spend money and take control of your finances. Changes your mindset, makes you want to get into minimalism and frugal living. And that's why I talk about it in so many different videos. Anyways, it's a good read. But so is Rich Dad Poor Dad. I've done a whole video on 20 different takeaways from this book, so I'm not gonna go too deep into it here. Pretty much if you're just starting getting into finances, this is a good book to read. It opens up a lot of possibilities. The idea of leverage, assets versus liabilities, how your home is not actually an asset. It's really a good story-based place to jump off from. But if you've already read a bunch of these other ones, you probably won't get a ton out of this. But what you will get a ton out of, hopefully, is the psychology of money, which I've also done a video on. But my top couple favorite points from this one is that money cannot buy you happiness, but it can buy you freedom. And freedom is pretty cool. I like freedom. I like to travel. I like to not have to go to work. I like to do whatever I want every day, spend time with my kid. And I can do that because of money and understanding it and making it work for me instead of the other way around. And also the point that the best financial advice is often the most simple. Like for most people, investing in low-cost index funds is going to be one of the best things that they can do to invest, as opposed to picking stocks, pretty much gambling, or investing in real estate, which is super big, all the get-rich-quick things, the complex stuff. Well, it might work for some people, most people, it's just going to be like a bad way to invest. So finances are actually really simple. Spend less than you earn, invest correctly. There's different ways to make more money. All the stuff we're talking about. Yeah. The next one is Early Retirement Extreme, which I read a couple years ago and I have somehow lost that book. But I originally learned about it from Mike Rosehart, who actually retired at 24, like a multimillionaire. I don't know what he's doing now. I think he's still like doing stuff. But one of my favorite quotes from this book is that you must be willing to change your frame of mind and conquer old habits. In particular, you must be willing to do things that 95% of the population won't be able to understand and 99% won't be able to do. A large part of the idea of this is extreme frugal living, and by doing that, you should be able to retire in 5 to 10 years by doing different creative things. However, it does involve being extremely frugal, so you gotta ask, would you rather be extremely frugal, which you can still have a lot of fun doing that, or would you rather work a job and have more money to spend but not really as much time? That's completely up to you, but I definitely do think that this is worth a read. The Millionaire Fastlane. I actually haven't finished reading this yet. I'm going through it and making notes. So hopefully this will be the next book that I review. If you want to see that, don't forget to subscribe. Trying to get to 500,000. Thank you to everybody who's already subscribed. But in this book, he really reminds you that you are the driver of your own life and your own finances. Whether it's your money, your mindset, or your financial future, don't allow other people to drive your car to have any impact on that. It is completely up to you whether you're successful, whether you're rich, or whether you're poor, whether you're unhappy. Pretty much everything in your life is in your control, how you frame it or what you do about it. Next up, not exactly a finance book, but it is Turning Pro. This helped me be way more productive and also take a lot of responsibility for my own financial situations. And it talks about going from an amateur at, mostly it's talking about work, to being a professional and kind of some habits. And it's all in these like short little sections, so it's super easy to read. Anything by Stephen Pressfield's very good. I've read most of his books. Anyways, talks about a professional shows up every day, is committed to the long haul, is patient, seeks order, acts in the face of fear, accepts no excuses, plays it as it lays, is prepared, doesn't show off, is dedicated to himself, dedicates himself to mastering the technique, reinvents herself, and endures adversity. Just so many great tips in here. I've got a couple other of his that I can't seem to find right now, but this is definitely a great read, super inspiring. I learned a lot from it. The Millionaire Next Door, a classic. It's about this person who studied a bunch of millionaires and didn't exactly find what they thought they would find. They found out that they did all the things that we've been talking about. They lived below their means. They drove slightly older cars. They didn't buy fancy clothes. They didn't try to show off. Like, they actually spent a lot less money than the people who were more middle class. They lived in slightly cheaper neighborhoods. They just pretty much valued money and didn't need to show off. And they found that wealth is more often the result of a lifestyle of hard work, perseverance, planning, and most of all, self-discipline. The Minimalist Entrepreneur, great book for entrepreneurs. A couple of my favorite takeaways from this is that you don't learn and then start, you start and then you learn. Minimalist entrepreneurs focus on getting profitable at all costs instead of growing at all costs, which I think is an important lesson for a lot of business owners right now. They expand as fast as possible. They just want to have this idea of a big team. But in general, for longevity and to not be like a statistic of a business that failed, you want to be profitable as early on as possible and try to stay that way because you're a business. You're trying to make money. It just makes sense. I will teach you to be rich. But this book is good as well. I actually debated putting it on this list because there are some things I don't completely agree with, but overall I do think it is a good book. He talks about getting things right 85% of the time. You don't have to be perfect all the time, but kind of like an easier way to get your finances on track where you're not cutting out the coffee, but you're focusing on the big wins, which I totally agree with. However, I wanted to reach financial independence as fast as I possibly could, and I did cut out the coffees, the going out to eat, all the different stuff, pretty much everything I possibly could. And because of that, I shaved years of time that I would have had to spend working at a job because I pretty much just started making coffee at home and doing other stuff that was just like easier for me, like extreme frugal living. So it just depends on what your style is, but overall it's definitely a solid book. It's a good baseline, a little program to follow, and it does make things easier if you're not as extreme as I am maybe. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Over 40 million copies sold. And this is not exactly a finance book, but it's not always finance books that make the biggest impact in your finances. For instance, this quote completely changed my mindset and gave me a ton of accountability for all the choices that I was making in my life. Until a person can say deeply and honestly, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday, that person cannot say, I choose otherwise. You can't say, oh, my circumstances, where I live, the job I had, the parents, the whatever, and then also say, I'm gonna do this instead of that. Like, does everything happen to you and you have no control over your life, or do you actually have control over your life and the decisions you make and you can change it? And people have come from far worse. It's totally up to you, it's totally up to me, and we can't blame other people. And speaking of blame, please don't blame me because this isn't a full list of 20. As a true minimalist, I had a list of 20, but then I cut it down because these are the books that I actually recommend to people. I have copies, I lend them out, and these are the books that I would personally read. A lot of the other ones just kind of repeated some of the same ideas. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, really means a lot. Let me know what books I missed down below, and I'll see you next week.